John Titor is an alternate reality game. When I first began writing this piece, I was still holding out hope that there might be some tiny element of mystery left to be wrung out of the John Titor story. Surprisingly, there was. Just not what I was expecting. People have studied and researched this case for years, investigating the validity of Titor's existence, or trying to uncover the identities of those behind this legendary tale of a man traversing time. Time travel as a sci-fi trope can be fertile ground for spinning a good yarn, and it was a particularly hot topic on Art Bell's Coast to Coast in 1998. And sci-fi in general was surging from the popularity of the X-Files. To this day, plenty of blogs and videos exist covering the subject of John Titor. Many continue to be convinced that there is still the possibility that the story could be true. That story is clever, creative, captivating, and quite possibly the first internet hoax, but not true. The story is a fabrication from the beginning, and I'll explain why. Let me first start off by saying I got caught up in the hoax, and I have a fondness for the story. I was tuning into Art Bell almost every evening. During the time, Art was receiving fax messages from an individual calling himself Time Traveler Zero. The Time Traveler line was one of the most requested segments of the program, and a favorite of mine. Then I followed the story over to Coast AM's internet forum in 2000 for the return, now using the new name of John Titor. John Titor. Apparently he called into Coast in November of that same year. He was also posting on another message board that was dedicated to the topic of time travel during that same window of time. The premise was very intriguing, and I wanted to know more. I'm telling you, at that point in my life, I wasn't in on Art's joke. I was often listening to NPR or BBC up until the start of Coast every evening. I guess I just assumed Art was curating the information coming through his show to the best of his ability. My thinking was that Art was filtering out some of the nonsense. Of course, now I know that's completely not the case. The hoaxers really played this one right, though, to a point. They were able to keep up the charade and hold public attention for decades. Where it went off the rails, in my opinion, was when someone, maybe someone who was completely unrelated to the original story, decided to try and monetize John Titor. There was already a precedent set by someone in the past that had made money off the property. In 2011, a Japanese animation studio produced a series called Steins Gate. One of the time-traveling characters used an alias, John Titor. There have also been several low-budget documentaries on the subject and numerous books. It appears that no one actually owns the rights to the story. There is a lineage of others claiming to be time travelers throughout history, and we'll cover those main offenders here. As it turns out, the list is rather short, and there aren't but a handful of well-known alleged time travelers. The earliest account is the Moberly-Jourdain incident. In 1911, two French women published a book stating they had seen and interacted with Marie Antoinette and witnessed members of her court carrying out daily life in the Palace of Versailles. A rather recent phenomena is the discovery of these so-called time traveler photos dating back to the 1940s. There are numerous images out there of people from the past holding what, to our modern eyes, appear to be modern devices. We've all seen these out there. The modern hipster in 1941, proven to be sunglasses and clothing appropriate for the time, albeit more casual than everyone else in the photo. The 1943 beach scene, where the man appears to have a device in his hand. He's rolling a fat cigarette. Also, a woman seen in Charlie Chaplin's film, The Circus, seems to be holding a device up to her ear. It was probably a newly invented, small, portable hearing aid. There have also been several accounts of time travel that have originated after the Titor story. Robert Robbie J. Todino, a professional spammer who sent an unknown number of spam emails in which he claimed to be a stranded time traveler in search of fellow time travelers with spare time machine parts. Turns out Robbie was mentally unstable and had to be put under professional care. The story is chronicled in the book Spam Kings, and Andrew Carlson supposedly was arrested in March of 2003 for SEC violations for making 126 high-risk trades and being successful on every single one. He was allegedly taken into custody and explained that his stock market knowledge was due to the fact that he was a time traveler. Story goes, a mysterious man posted his bail. Carlson didn't appear for his court hearing, and he's never been heard from again. Nowadays, YouTube is full of people doing the whole time traveler thing. Entire channels are dedicated to the subject and give those wacky chrononauts out there a platform to voice their stories.
This is Apex TV. Welcome to the finest amount of complex knowledge you will ever find in one place. Apex TV, thank you so much.
The John Titor story is the most famous time travel hoax so far. No doubt rocketed to notoriety with the help of Mr. Art Bell. Art had a knack of putting himself into the narrative, Hunter S. Thompson, Gonzo style, and it was his show after all. The most infamous of these types of instances was the Heaven's Gate Hale Bopp mass suicide. Bell is connected to a host of other hoaxes, in the name of entertainment, of course. Back in 2000, when Titor was posting, the year 2020 seems so far off in the future. Titor said he lived in the year 2036. It doesn't seem that distant now. I guess we should start working on that time machine pretty soon, because it's got to be up and running with all the bugs worked out within 16 years, according to Titor. My original impulse was to do a fun piece on the Titor myth and detail the events. But as I got into it, I realized the myth had been revealed as having all the hallmarks of a hoax over 6 years ago. Countless people on the internet have covered Titor's story, his history, his online interactions to a great extent. But it should be clear to anyone looking into Titor at this point to easily see it for what it is. However, that is not the case for at least one person associated with the John Titor story. Pamela Moore supposedly has had more direct personal contact with Titor than anyone else. It appears that the hoaxers found a really gullible individual in her, who unwittingly helped them further embed their hoax. They've toyed with her to the point where now no amount of evidence will ever convince her that John Titor isn't a real person. The hoaxers had numerous private message exchanges with her, and someone posed as Titor for phone conversations. Titor even gave Moore a secret song that supposedly only she and John would know about, so that when she heard it, she would know it was him, the real one. Oh my God. They were playing with that poor, lonely woman's emotions. She's been interviewed and apparently still holds out hope that John Titor is a real person and will return. Just like me, when I initially started listening to Art Bell, Pamela Moore wasn't in on the joke either. They basically Benowitzed her, whoever they are. This whole thing brought a memory to mind that I haven't thought about in a long time. In the summer of 1984, I was the victim of a far less elaborate hoax. While on the phone one afternoon with my cousin, strange beeping and pulsed tones, which seemed to be intelligently responding to our conversation, intruded on our call. We talked a lot on the phone back then. I was 11, he was 12, so I looked up to him, I trusted him. We also had logged many hours on his Radio Shack TRS-80 computer too, which was awesome. I remember playing Dungeons of Daggerath all day and dialing into the very early internet by night, which was not very exciting. My family didn't own a computer, so I really wasn't aware how it all worked. Quite frankly, I thought the computer was a magical device. We would joke about hacking into companies and looking into secret documents. So, here we are on the phone, and the beeping starts. I realize it's reacting to what I'm saying, and instead of making the logical conclusion that my cousin might be pulling a prank, something he was known to do to me, instead, I jumped to the notion that maybe we were being hacked. Apparently, my cousin thought this was his chance to sink his hook into me, and we decided to start asking it questions. I turned it into kind of a Ouija board experience. 2 beeps meant yes, 1 meant no, that sort of thing. My cousin seemed just as freaked out as me, and I thought he was being honest. I was now firmly on the hook. The barb was way past my lip at this point. So he really bears down and begins to reel me in. I can't recall exactly what freaked me out so much, but I started to get scared and paranoid. My cousin then got his sister to join in with him on the phone, and she played right along too. The next day we got back on the phone, and I was anxious for the experience to happen again. And sure enough, the beeps cranked back up. I had fallen for it again. Our families got together the following day for dinner. Before the truth was revealed, though, my younger brother was caught up to speed by my cousins, and of course they all had a good laugh at my expense afterward. I must have brought it up to our parents because I wanted them to hear it too. That's when the pranksters had to come clean. It's my own fault for being so gullible in the first place. It's pretty easy to manipulate most people. An interesting facet of these hoaxes is in tracking how a good-natured, harmless prank can grow and almost manifest itself in the real world in an ugly way. Slender Man is a good example for that. These types of manifestations are called tulpas, and the idea originated in ancient Buddhism. A tulpa is a concept in mysticism and the paranormal of a being or object which is created through spiritual or mental powers. It was adapted by 20th century theosophist from Tibetan Sarulpa, which means emanation or manifestation. Modern practitioners use the term to refer to a type of willed imaginary friend, with practitioners considered to be sentient and relatively autonomous. Are the mystic Buddhists really able to bring something into the world that previously didn't exist? In a similar way, an ARG creator and its participants co-create a new reality.
Tulpas, seriously?
The only thing left to do now is try to figure out who started this hoax to begin with. There haven't been that many credible people that could pull something like this off, except for one man. In order to get public attention and their involvement in the first place, a compelling backstory would have to be covertly injected into the culture. There is someone who's known to create such mythical backstories for other projects and was technically capable of dispersing it by means of an early internet. The name that rises to the surface is Joseph Matheny. Joseph Matheny is an American writer and transmedia artist. Matheny is the creator of Ong's Hat, a massive multimedia game art project from the late 90s. I wasn't familiar with this type of thinking at the time, so Ong's Hat would have gone right over my head. What I was familiar with in 1999 was the Blair Witch Project, which employed many of the same techniques as Ong's Hat. The The marketing for this film used these tactics to great effect. A friend introduced me to the upcoming film when it was still just a viral media piece before there were viral media pieces. I love the concept, plus I'm a huge horror fan, so it really appealed to me. The viral campaign pushed the found footage film into the consciousness of many. I was in on this joke, and I even took my girlfriend to the movie and told her ahead of time it was based on a true story, so she was pretty freaked out when it was over. It was hilarious. Here's a little background and the plot of the alternate reality game, Ong's Hat. The threads of this story can be traced back as far as the 1980s on a bulletin board system, an old Xerox mail art network, and early zines. The aim was to create a fictional storyline and embed it in various media cultures to establish backstory. It may have started as an in-joke or the first alternate reality game, ARG, a work of transmedia storytelling, or as a mimetic experiment to see how far the meme could spread, or a combination of all of the above. The story eventually used print, radio, television, and digital mediums such as CD-ROM, DVD, the internet, and BBS in its dissemination. The initial ground rules acknowledge the possibility that such an experiment could end up going down darker paths. Ong's Hat was more of an experiment in transmedia storytelling than what we would now consider to be an ARG, but its DNA, the concept of storytelling across various platforms and new media, is evident in every alternate reality game that came after that. The plot of Ong's Hat. The urban legend or alternate history states that a facility manned by renegade Princeton professors conducted quantum physics and chaos theory experiments, and according to conspiracy theories, discovered a new theory for dimensional travel using a device called the EEG, the egg. They were largely based on the ghost town of Ong's Hat, New Jersey, hence the name of the project. It started off in a journal, I think, called the Incunabula, and it was full of, other different writings and things, and it was perpetuated from there. It just went on from there. This multi-disciplined approach to creating art brought forth a more realistic mesh for the fictional story to live in. Creating art that spills into every form of media and takes on a life of its own seems to be one of Matheny's goals. In 2015, on the podcast Project Archivist, Joseph Matheny laid out in detail the inception of John Titor and the original intent and implementation of the story. In essence, he claims the initial impulse was to simply mess with Art Bell and his audience, which Matheny says he was a member, and from there it grew into a huge topic of discussion. Matheny states that he and 3 others were responsible for the original story, faxes, message board posts, and calls to Coast from 1998 to 2001. When Art took interest in the story, he said they were thrilled, and all 4 Titors worked on each of their respective pieces of the project. After that, Matheny says he had no involvement with the story anymore. He was responsible of covering a portion of the lore and posing as one of the 4 Titors. Matheny said that the reason the other 3 people involved have not come forward is due to the fact they are in positions of influence in the entertainment industry and simply don't want to be associated with the story. Interestingly, Matheny has said 3 unidentified others were involved in Ong's Hat as well, and one of them had to carry out the final mission. Seems like maybe that's what he was doing with the Titor story too. He was the one to carry out the mission. In both Ong's Hat and Titor, yes, that was Matheny. From a print interview in 2006, Matheny provides a description of the team who was behind Ong's Hat. It reads as follows. One was an artist who made beautiful moving and otherworldly collages and pictures. One was a poetic terrorist who would weave words together with an unparalleled passion and vigor. Another was a media and network hacker who could make the media pay attention to a bingo match in Poughkeepsie if he wanted them to.
One was a psychiatrist.
One was a physicist with lots of friends in the dancing woolly master circles and a wonderful twisted sense of sexual humor. Most likely the team that brought you John Titor, in my estimation. Unless, of course, the team is make-believe too, which could be the case. Matheny, being the one to fulfill the mission requirements, is fine at this point disclosing his involvement. Apparently, that was part of the mission. The four also made a verbal pact upon Ong's Hat's creation. Never let it be used to start a cult. Never let it be used as a platform to piss down the back of anyone who gave blood, sweat, and tears to make it realized. If a channel became available that made it more accessible to more people and money was involved, give the money away. When and if all becomes too much to manage, toss it into the public domain via a free game. This type of game has the potential to do damage. Ong's Hat consumed the thoughts and drove at least one person to a psychotic break. In 2002, a woman named Lisa Ann Gardner began posting strange messages, telling very, very bizarre stories connected to her obsession with Ong's Hat.
There is someone who is named John Michael Gannon, who is supposedly an impersonator of John Michael Stipe of the band R.E.M., who is currently living on Ong's Hat and who is threatening to take my baby child. Oh yes, I do know what Ong's Hat is. Now, because of dreams I've had about my baby's thighs and a scepter, I think he wants my baby because what my baby represents. He is apparently standing to profit quite a lot of money by taking my baby from me and delivering him to whomever he needs to be delivered to. I'm taking this threat seriously. I would like the government or other protection in this matter. I'm not sure who to turn to. Does anyone know anything about this guy, John Michael Gannon?
I don't know what to make of any of that. At any rate, I felt it was important to highlight a known ARG and compare it to the John Titor story, which in my opinion is an ARG as well. From the sound of it now, Joe Matheny would be fine if he were solely attributed to the creation of the story. He did mention that he had plans to go public in 2003 on a podcast that he had at the time with at least one of the other contributors to the Titor myth, but the guest backed out at the last second. It seems Matheny has tried to protect the legacy of the original John Titor story too. In fact, he recounts when he found out that an entertainment lawyer, Larry Haber, had emerged on the scene representing the Titor family as spokesperson for the John Titor Foundation, which released a book in 2003 supposedly written by Titor's mother. It sells on Amazon now for $200. It's been out of print for 18 years. Matheny states that he called Haber and said that he was the real John Titor, expletive, and he'd better cease and desist promoting the foundation and the book and disassociate him with the story. Or Matheny said he threatened to reveal the truth and blow the whistle on the whole thing. He honestly seems a little bitter that people haven't attributed the John Titor story as the follow-up to Ong's Hat. He also said that when he created Ong's Hat, he had put himself in the story and used his real name. This turned out to be a mistake because people eventually could always point to an identifiable individual as possibly the creator of the story, which he was. Matheny made sure not to have his name attached to anything Titor related. Between 2015 and 2019, he was out there on the podcast circuit, if there is such a thing, trying to insert his name into the story after the fact. I found that interesting. Really good interviews too, by the way. After listening to several long-form interviews with Matheny, recorded between 2015 and 2019. I'm not sure I completely trust him, and I'm not sure I'm supposed to. He is a self-proclaimed anarchist, trickster, and artist. Part of his approach to life skirts gray areas of culture, society, and art. He clearly was involved in the creation of Titor's story to some degree, but it seems now that he's kind of putting himself out there as the mastermind behind the whole thing, and the person who deserves credit for its creation. Maybe he does. It's intentionally confusing. I'm really starting to see how one could unleash a hoax and maintain that story far into the future. As long as the hoaxers keep quiet and don't overtly try to cash in, the story will still exist. It has the possibility to gradually increase momentum until enough people are hooked and they try to convince others. And this can happen again and again with these kind of stories. People forget about it, and then it creeps back into the culture. Even as late as 2014,
George Norrie
was still out there promoting the myth.
Was John Titor a real man? I don't know. Maybe he was an angel. What do you think? Let's take some screen calls. Wildcard line, you're on Coast to Coast AM. And caller, I'll let you talk while I get back to my nap. Go ahead, caller.
George. Glad to reach you, George. Been dedicating the last 6 months of my life every night calling into your show, and it really's paid off. I'm here, George. John Titor is a true story, George. How else can you explain why Y2K didn't completely wipe us all out? He just may have been the second coming and we all missed it. You can't say he didn't save us, George. George, can you say it, George? George, are you there?
Yes, caller, thank you. 6 months, finally got on. Good for him. Bless his heart. Really nothing to work with, though. Next up, west of the Rockies. Good evening, you're on Coast to Coast AM.
I get the appeal. It's a prophetic tale of time travel and the destruction of our future Earth. That's the makings of an epic story. It's a disaster fetish, and that's what Art's show was about most of the time. Hey, I was there every night too. I must have loved it. I have always loved the subject of time travel. It's a subject that really can bend your mind and lead you into some interesting questions. It's also a subject that can be argued firmly or against from a scientific perspective. If time travel is invented at some point in our future, does that mean a time travel must already exist now? My guess is that if a time traveler were here on a mission, they would do so covertly, not start up a YouTube page or agree to be interviewed on Coast to Coast. I'm intrigued by this idea. What if it is possible to time travel and also possible to build a time machine? The catch is you can't ever get back to your own timeline once you leave. Like Sam in Quantum Leap. Hang on. If you are still thinking to yourself, well, what about all those spot-on predictions of Titor's? Let's clear that up. Very few were accurate at all. The majority were outright incorrect or didn't happen altogether. It's kind of the broken clock idea. Even it's right twice a day. The accuracy rate of his predictions is very low, like anyone else would be, from speculating on a future based on current events. He was concerned with concerns of the late 90s. Looking at all his warnings now about Y2K, rampant mad cow disease, civil war, nuclear annihilation, and that's all before 2012. It's glaring how wrong Titor actually got it. Thank God. It sounds horrible. With all the evidence pointing to the fact that the John Titor story is an ARG or a hoax, some people still aren't able to let it go. There are other instances where there's a mystery and it's solved, and people still refuse to believe it's actually solved. I recently watched a documentary by J. Michael Bennett on the mysterious origins of the Georgia Guidestones, and that's exactly what's going on there. If you didn't know, the Georgia Guidestones is a monument located in the granite capital of the world, Alberton, Georgia. The monument carries a message consisting of a set of 10 guidelines or principles engraved into the stones in 8 different languages, one language on each face of the 4 large upright stones. Moving clockwise around the structure from due north, these languages are English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, traditional Chinese, Russian. The stones read,
maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, and love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature.
The most widely agreed upon interpretation of the stones is that they describe the basic concepts required to build a devastated civilization. Author Brad Meltzer notes that the stones were built in 1979 at a height of the Cold War, and thus argues that they may have intended to be a message to possible survivors of a nuclear war. The engraved suggestion to keep humanity's population below 500 million could have been made under the assumption that war had already reduced humanity below this number. The documentary tracked down most of the people associated with its construction from the town. The monument was officially erected by an anonymous individual. However, the filmmakers filmed some documents while they were making this film. They weren't really supposed to see those, and it revealed some details about the real identity of the monument builder, the benefactor, if you will. Even though it seemed clear after their investigation as to who built the Guidestones, the little town where it's located would rather continue on as if the mystery was still unsolved. Wikipedia considers the true identity of the benefactor of the Guidestones still unknown despite the filmmakers' findings. I live about 60 miles from the site, so my family and I decided to pay a little visit to the Georgia Guidestones last spring. Not really that impressive, but worth the short drive for us, just to say we've been there. Looks like the builder had intended the site to expand to another ring of monolithic granite blocks, kind of like Stonehenge style. He apparently ran out of funding though. While there, a hippie lady gave my daughter a painting, and I was worried it might be infected with COVID, so it's been sitting out in the garage there ever since. Kind of a cool token from our visit to the stones. I should bring it in. The thing about these kinds of stories are, yes, the story has now been proven false, but give it a few years, and usually the hoaxers will attempt to reignite interest in the tale or create a new one. People will stumble on it somewhere, and then the whole story will get rebooted again. I really do think this hoax was initiated for artistic reasons in the beginning, and it was really never meant to be taken seriously. Just to bring this back around to current events, after really digging into the Titor story, which led me to Ong's Hat, which revealed to me how a hoax could easily be foisted on an unsuspecting public, a public who doesn't have the maturity and or the wherewithal to think for themselves in the first place. My opinion is that this can be very dangerous territory to tread. People are simply too easily manipulated. Take a look at popular conspiracies of today and ask yourself, does any of that even make rational sense? And if not, perhaps the truth is in seeing how a metaphor has now been warped into a literal interpretation. This current crop of conspiracies really does reek of the implementation of an alternate reality game at their core. Titor, as an ARG, eventually turned into an urban legend. That story had a relatively benign effect on society, and very few people got too wrapped up to a dangerous level because it wasn't playing with religious or political ideologies, and it wasn't being used as fear-mongering propaganda. If a malicious ARG was being carried out on the public, how could we even tell? I think if I heard a politician spouting off details about John Titor, just like politicians are spouting off details about popular conspiracy theories of today, I would have to question that person's grasp on reality at this point. But what is reality, really? This dive into the world of John Titor was surprisingly a little off-putting. So on a final fun note, the Time Cop series may have been the inspiration for Titor after all. Not a combination of The Terminator and Back to the Future. Time Cop 2, The Berlin Decision, is considered the worst representation of time travel storytelling in history. The original was starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, and it was schlocky enough to get by. The sequel couldn't land him again, but they proceeded to create a film that's almost absolutely impossible to watch. But in my opinion, those are sometimes